Hello, everyone. This is Rebecca Martin, founder of Cinema Femme, and I am so excited. This is take two. We tried this last week, but this is the real thing now. We're going to be talking, or I'm going to be having a conversation with Dawn Porter. She is an amazing documentarian. I saw her film, the first film I saw was John Lewis, Good Trouble. And then I also saw shortly after that The Way I See It. Her films are just so important for this time, and also just full of empathy with the people who are in her films. And, I can't wait to dig in with her. Before we do get to the discussion, I'm going to bring up a clip from The Way I See It.
This is Jacob, Philadelphia. At one point, Jacob's mom said, "Mr. President, Jacob has a question for you." So Jacob's kind of like, "Mr. President, my friends tell me that my haircut is just like yours." And with that, President Obama bent over, Jacob touched his head, click, I got one photo, and it was gone.
That image was what Barack Obama had said to us 2 years ago in an office in Chicago. That kid literally can't even believe, even though he's seeing the President of the United States in the Oval Office, until he can feel his hair, he doesn't truly believe that he's just like me. That single image stands for so much more. It stands for how kids will see themselves differently forever.
But two, I think it tells you something about Barack Obama, that at the behest of a 5-year-old kid, you would go ahead, bend over, and let that kid touch your head like that.
All right. Here's Dawn. Hi, Dawn. Thank you for joining us for this tribute event. I'm so excited to talk to you about, your filmmaking, your career, and this is great. I really appreciate it. So I guess we could just get into it. I was wanting to start with you telling me what drew you into documentary filmmaking.
Sure, and thank you for being the most patient host ever. For my sense of time in the COVID is not the best, so it's really a thrill to be here. And thank you all so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I was a lawyer before I was a filmmaker, and I was a litigator. And one of the things, I realize now that being a litigator is really good training for being a documentarian. I mean, what we do in the law is very similar to what we do in film, which is we often take something complicated and try and make it understandable. You're able to put yourself in someone else's shoes. So, but what was missing from the law was like the real humanity. And so with filmmaking, I find that my interest in people's stories is able to, expand, be expansively expressed.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's, I feel like I love my job.
Yeah.
I'm really curious about people, I'm really curious about, I'm particularly curious about like what makes people take those big momentous steps to help other people. Like, what is that spark that makes people do that? And so I think a lot of my films, particularly the two films this year, John Lewis and, The Way I See It, I think those are both investigations of that question, And so John Lewis, and then for me, like, it's not usual to do two films like this, like so close together.
Right. Yeah.
And it's especially not useful. Hopefully we never have another worldwide plague, but they really spoke to me together, because John Lewis's whole life was saying, if you see something that's not right, say something.
Yes.
And that's what Pete was doing at his 60s. He was saying, I'm going to speak with more than my camera. I'm coming out and saying what I think, because I have seen something and I know how important this is. So the films, although they're totally different styles and different protagonists, they really like spoke to me.
Yeah. And this is a question I'll ask later on, but I feel like empathy like ties those, like as a theme, ties those two films together. And yeah, so I want to get into that, but first I wanted to just, I actually just watched your film Trapped, which was premiered at Sundance in 2016. Is that right?
That is right.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting to me. First of all, that film coming out before, Trump came into office, and it's just like your films have a timeliness, and I want to focus more on last year's films, but I wondered if you could talk about Trapped and just what drove you to do a film on that topic at that time.
Yeah. I was actually working on another project that was a historical film, and I was in Mississippi. And I like to read the local papers wherever I am, just to get a sense of where I am. And I think, like, so often when you're on one of the big coastal cities, you miss kind of the fabric of what's happening in the rest of the world. So I like reading local papers. And I read that there was a clinic in Mississippi that was the last clinic in the state.
Yeah.
And that it was in danger of closing. And I was just kind of shocked by that, because I thought, as a person who was interested in reproductive rights, I'm a lawyer, I've like followed this. I couldn't believe I didn't know that. And I thought, well, if I don't know that, a lot of other people don't know that. So I actually just had one of my team producers. I was like, can you just call this clinic and see if I can come over? And so I guess by then they were used to getting kind of press inquiries. So, but I walked in and I met Dr. Parker, and here this like, African-American Southern gentleman.
Yeah, he's amazing, by the way. What an amazing guy. Yeah.
And he's the doctor. And I was like, oh yes, this is something we're going to do together. And so, he was like just finishing up, and he was like, let's go have coffee. So we just talked, and I was like, and he said, why don't you come to Chicago, where he was living. So I flew to Chicago, and, we went out for a meal, and just talked about, I just said, just tell me what's happening. Just tell me what's happening. And so then it was very naturally from there, we just started, where he was trying to explain. At that time, he was living in Chicago, but flying on his weekends and vacation to do procedures in Mississippi.
That is amazing. Oh my God. Yeah.
So it just kind of grew from there. But, that film was really difficult. You mentioned the timeliness of it. Because, and this is where being a lawyer was instrumental for me. I went to my lawyer friends who were arguing these cases. So it's Nancy Northup from the Center for Reproductive Rights. And I knew Nancy a little, but I didn't know her really well at that time. Now we know each other much better.
Yeah.
And I said, just take me through the Supreme Court. Like, what's happening? And she said something that I still remember when she said it. She said, one of these cases is going to the Supreme Court. And so they're all marching up right now. We don't know which one it is. She said, if I had to bet, I'm thinking it's Texas. And that is like red flag to a bull,
Right.
A case that I'm arguing and going.
Yeah.
So then I had Dr. Parker, I had this case marching to the court. And so then the film really started to take shape. But what it did is I wanted the film to be in the conversation around. That meant it had to come out before that case was argued. So we were like, Sundance or bust, like that's our shot. We knew the case was going to be argued in March. So we had, and also we had no money. We had no money. When I say no money, we got an emergency $5,000 grant to start.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
And so producer Marilyn Ness is a force, and but we both were up at night, like trying to get the money to do things and to film and not miss things. So it was like a little race for us too, to do it and to make it good. We really wanted to make it good. So, every film is an adventure. Sometimes you have the money and not the time, and sometimes you have the time and not the money.
Right. Right.
So,
Yeah. No, I honestly think you're like a superwoman in the sense, like, I mean, filmmakers in general, female filmmakers, I'm just like, how do you do that? How do you get all that money and then bring all these people together and make things happen and just make an awesome film? And people like you, where I'm like, this is timely. Like you're just, touching on these amazing people that have, these, just these incredible life stories, and I'm impressed, basically. That's what I'm saying. But yeah, so that kind of, my next question kind of tags on that, in the sense that I'm interested to hear like what draws you to certain subjects or certain people, because the Bobby Kennedy series on Netflix, and then the John Lewis film and Pete Souza, and then I saw the Vernon Jordan documentary. Like, what draws you to these particular people?
I think I'm interested in people who make big decisions, whether they're big decisions for them personally or big decisions on a national stage. But I'm definitely interested in this idea of what changes people and motivates them. So for Bobby Kennedy, that was just fascinating to me. He did not start out as the civil rights hero that we know him to be when he died. My grandmother had a picture of the Kennedy brothers in her kitchen.
Wow.
And,
okay.
It's like Jesus and the Kennedy brothers.
Yeah, right. Okay.
How did the Kennedy brothers end up in a Black grandmother's kitchen in Harlem? And
right.
that was always just like, oh, the Kennedy brothers. We love Kennedys, I guess. So when I started looking into his story, and actually it brought me to John Lewis. So I didn't know John Lewis volunteered for Kennedy's campaign.
Yeah.
And so, I kind of, the other thing I was really interested in at that point in my career was working in Archival. I had worked at ABC News, and I knew that there's this magical thing called the tape library, where it's all of the footage that ABC's ever captured.
Wow.
Library. And so there were film cans, because in the 1960s, ABC was an upstart. CBS and NBC established networks. ABC was like, ooh, flashy. And they did something that other people hadn't done, is they sent filmmakers like D.A. Pennebaker out to film on 16mm film.
Wow.
And ABC had that footage. So I knew from a colleague that there were these cans that said 1968, but they had not been digitized. And there was no money to digitize them. So, I went to Netflix and said, listen, like, I think there's film that nobody's ever seen before, and it's on film. And I think it's these great filmmakers, and they took kind of a flyer with me to say, like, let's see what's on it. And sure enough, I'm like, what would you film in 1968? You would film Martin Luther King, you would film Kennedy. That's got to be what's on there. That's what's going to be national news. And sure enough, there was a ton of footage of his speeches, traveling through, just you feel the energy that was directed at Kennedy. And then, the thing I wanted to do there was not have it be people who were observers who had the benefit of time. I wanted it to be people who worked with him, who hugged him, who heard him, knew his voice. So it became this search for people who knew him personally.
Yeah.
And I think that injects, first of all, these were people who they bought into the mission. Like they were young, Peter Edelman, who, by the way, was my constitutional law professor.
Really?
In law school.
Yeah.
And is married to like one of my other sheroes, Marian Wright Edelman. They met because Bobby Kennedy invited Marian Wright Edelman to testify before Congress. And she invites him to Mississippi, and with his young aide, Peter Edelman. And then the two of them get married. I mean, so there's just like all these great stories.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Knowing because when she says he saw poverty and he felt it, there's something that's very different than if a historian is saying that. She was there and saw he was outraged. A piece of that story that, you're always like second guessing yourself, that I don't think we got into enough, is after he went to Mississippi and saw Americans starving. Americans were starving. He dedicated Peter Edelman to going to the Department of Agriculture, and he sent food aid. We send food aid to Africa. Bobby Kennedy directed the Department of Agriculture to force them to send food aid to Mississippi.
Wow.
And that's how people got through that winter. So, but seeing you kind of, this picture of Kennedy emerges as a person who was open to change and really had a very personal and deep and profound evolution. And so I was interested in that. And that, then led directly to John Lewis, because they had their interaction. Kennedy was changed by the people around him, and a lot of the people around him that he chose to put around him were Black. And I thought that was really interesting, that he, kind of welcomed and a number of people who were very critical of what he was doing. But, a good leader welcomes people to push you and to, expand your understandings. So.
And something I want to say that I noticed when I rewatched the series, that you're just so good at bringing things alive, like in the sense that things that were back in the 60s, you feel like watching the footage and then the people talking, that you're there, you're actually there seeing these things happen. And just to have, I think it was when Kennedy was shot, and then the guy, I think you mentioned, Edelman, was also on the ground next to him. Is that right? Or did I get my guys mixed up?
Yes.
Sorry.
That was Paul, who was his aide. And, Paul is part of the reason the series came to life, because he volunteered he was also an organizer on Kennedy's campaign, and he's now 94, and he's got these sparkly blue eyes and this mischievous sense. And, he called him Bob, and he brought Kennedy alive for me. And, and so that was really a creative inspiration. So thank you for saying that, because that was really the goal. Was just to immerse you in the time and understand kind of what were the pressures of the time. Because it's so hard to look back with 21st century eyes, and remember it was unusual for people of different races to travel together. It was unusual, and it still is to a large extent, for people to work together. So it was unusual for women to be in, certain spaces. So you have to remember that. You have to see that in order for it to remind you. So when you choose people who lived with somebody, they still all recall his death so personally, and that adds a depth, I think, to the watching experience.
Right. And and sorry, did you have, okay. My follow-up question to that, this is actually working really well, because the things you say, like the question following, it works perfect. So, I was talking about how your documentaries, like the Bobby Kennedy series, kind of comes alive. And I feel like you're really good at capturing, American history, and then, making these connections to what's happened in our present day. So I don't know, I mean, maybe this is a deeper question, but I'm curious. I mean, you're so good at capturing American history in the heart of it and bringing it to life and, connecting to our current situation. So could you talk about your passion for using American history as a tool in your documentaries?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a natural outgrowth of being interested in nonfiction film, because I think part of what's so much fun is, and I'm so curious about, is to look back at things we thought we knew, and when you add in some details, like adding in the idea that it was Congressman John Lewis, who was then in his 20s, who advised Bobby Kennedy to speak in Indianapolis on the day that Martin Luther King Jr. is shot, that adds a whole nother dimension to that experience. It was a young Black kid in his 20s saying to this very powerful senator who was running for president, you must speak to the Black people tonight. And Kennedy does. And it's thought of as one of his best speeches. And he is the person who delivers the news that King has died. And Indianapolis does not have a riot that night. It's one of the only major cities that is the case for.
It's amazing.
So when we add all this in, like, it has the benefit of being truer and helping us really understand, but also, you know, when we condense history and when we smooth the edges too much, we don't really have a sense of how hard it is to make change. And, you know, when I think of like young people and people who are really working hard to push our society forward, I think like we have to remind them that none of these changes happened in a linear fashion. They're not neat. They're the messy outgrowth of compromise. Because who wants to try and be a leader if you think you have to be a saint and have all the answers, you know?
Right.
I feel like hopefully it encourages people, but I also feel like, you know, so like with the John Lewis film, the thing that was so interesting to me is how much training they did to prepare to go. He didn't just show up on a bridge, and neither did right? And they were 19, and they organized, they executed, they implemented that plan. They desegregated a city that had been segregated for more than 100 years. They were 19. And that is awesome. But, you know, what I wanted to celebrate about that moment or point out was it wasn't just bravery. Bravery was important, but it was strategy. It was intelligence. So, you know, for me, when I think about like attacking racism, I'm like, you attack it with the truth. You say, why aren't we celebrating this person's strategy? Why don't we talk about John Lewis as a brilliant strategist? And you know, and then I think a lot of people are like, why don't we? Like, clearly he's a brilliant strategist. So I think that, you know, also like I was a poli-sci major, I was a philosophy minor. Like I've just always been interested in those. Filling in those details.
And I appreciate that. So when we did our interview last year in July, I pointed out that I didn't know about the training for these like peaceful sit-ins. Like I didn't know that, you know, they got hit, you know, practice got hit so they could know how to react when somebody was coming at them. And I'm just like, that is so important, because I feel like, you know, if that started getting implemented where people do like peaceful training for protests, that could, I don't know. I think we can learn something from that. So I think it was really interesting seeing that. So
I really felt that. And, you know, people always, you know, ask like what motivated John Lewis. I mean, he had almost a religious acceptance of nonviolence. You know, he because he studied with Jim Lawson and Dr. King and others, he studied Gandhi, he studied religion, he studied politics. He literally came to a determination that this was how he would live his life. It was almost like a baptism, you know? And so once he decided that, he never wavered from that. And so it's easy to understand the way he behaved once you understand that he made a conscious decision as a young adult that he would always work for nonviolent change, for change nonviolently. So
yeah, that's great. And I think I have two more questions, I think. Well, we'll tie up on time, but I'm circling back to empathy. So I felt like both films touched on empathy, but in two different lights. Like John Lewis, as we were talking about, was empathetic in his peaceful approach to, you know, protesting and hate and prejudice and violence. And he just had this huge heart for empathy. And then Pete Souza, it was interesting because throughout the film, you see how he's transformed by seeing Obama's empathy towards people. And just kind of that clip we saw in the beginning with the boy and, you know, Obama touching his head. Like, I think you could see through the documentary how his heart, Pete Souza's heart, was just opening up by seeing this empathetic spirit of Obama. And so, can you talk about the role of empathy in both of these films?
Sure. When people talk about the way I see it, the way I think of it is it's not a film about President Obama. It's a film about leadership and what are the really crucial leadership qualities. And chief among them is empathy. And by empathy, being able to put yourself in the situation of a person who is undergoing some kind of struggle. And I think you see that with President Biden now. I think we may not agree with every choice that he makes, but you can't deny that he is at least, he sees.
Got a heart. Yeah.
And I think, if you ask somebody like, what's the most important quality for a president? I don't know that empathy would have been at the top. And yet, time after time after time, you see that President Obama's ability to have that empathy is what drove him to make some of the most important changes and policy choices in his administration. The Affordable Care Act, thinking about people with no insurance, like example after example. And then there are just, those just kind of stunning moments, when he flies to visit the Sandy Hook parents.
Yes. Yeah. And tears.
That was the hardest interview I've ever done, because I looked at that man and I wanted to start crying.
Yeah.
And I thought, when you're a documentary maker, this happens a lot where you have to take people through the worst time of their lives. And so if you're going to ask somebody to do that, like, it has to be worth it, to make that man face that pain again. It had to be for an important reason. So I tried to think really, really hard about what I was going to ask and how to ask it. And, I think the essence of that, he told the story about like what it meant to his family, that the United States cared about his wife and his 9-year-old kid in his extreme grief. That was a comfort to him, that he was actually cared, that somebody that important and busy would take all the time that his family needed in order to feel seen and to know that the country was grieving along with them. And, that's the kind of president we want.
Yes. Yeah.
You want to feel that. Mr. Wheeler told me that he keeps that photo in his office in a place where other people can't see it, but he can see it. And I said to him, "Why would you keep that?" And he said, "Because it reminds me that we had a president who did that for my family. So it's the worst day of my life. Of course, I'm never going to forget it. But out of that came, a belief, like belief in government."
Yeah, and that's what I love about your films. Like, you show these people that are just living their lives in a way that give other people hope. And I think that is commendable when, there's so much negativity out there, and you can see the hope through all the, the craziness and the darkness, and you just have a great way of bringing those stories to life. So, yeah. So I'm just going to skip to my last question. Are you okay if we go a little over? Okay. Okay. So in the interview we did last year, I wanted to ask the same question I did I wanted to talk about legacy, because when I had asked you, how you're so good at covering people's legacies, and documenting them. And I wanted to know, what is the legacy you hope to leave as a documentarian?
I do think it is, I love that people appreciate how because I do look for that empathetic, the opportunity to be empathetic and to really try just for a moment to picture yourself in somebody else's situation.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think about the young girl in Trapped, who, was having an abortion, and it was excruciating for her. She had disappointed herself. And so
Mm-hmm.
to put yourself in the position of a young girl without a lot of money, who wants a future, maybe you think about things a little differently before you
Mm-hmm.
miss other people's choices. So I do think the opportunity to work on both of these films during the Trump administration, which mercifully is fading into the recess.
Yes. Yes. Woohoo. Sorry. Yep.
But it was a real way to hold on to my own optimism,
Mm-hmm.
and faith.
Mm-hmm.
I've always tended towards the more optimistic, and I think during the Trump presidency, I really felt that wavering. I really felt so much anger so often, but I
Mm-hmm.
felt something I hadn't felt before. I felt really helpless. And I
Mm-hmm.
thought, I need to remember that this is not the norm, that this
Right.
is going to pass, that
Mm-hmm.
there's a much longer history of people abiding by conventional norms and laws.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So working on those films, like, I feel like it's pretty lucky that that's my job.
Yeah.
So I guess,
That's yeah.
the timeliness thing, like, they speak to the time because it's part of my way of working through the time I'm in.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so that's part of, like, choosing subjects that are a great way to do that.
Yeah, that's great. And I know you have some exciting projects coming up, but I know they're kind of under wraps, so we don't need to get into them. But I'll just say this. I'm really excited to follow, you and your career, and I'm just excited just to see, more people being exposed to your work, and thank you.
No, thank you so much, and you're so generous and patient. I really appreciate it, and I love
Yeah.
you, and I look forward to doing it again soon.
Yes. Yes. Thank you, Dawn, and have a good weekend.
You too. All right.
All right. Bye.
Bye. Take care.